What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video. Every year, I do my initial fantasy football rankings in early May. I do it right after the NFL draft, and for the most part, I leave the rankings alone. I don't touch them unless someone like Dalvin Cook gets cut, then of course I adjust. But for the most part, I leave it alone. Then I revisit rankings in August. Now, I don't look at my old rankings. I start a brand new sheet from scratch. I look at a list of players and I rank them out without having the influence of my old rankings or anybody else's rankings in my mind. So the reason I do this is I like to see where my opinions have changed on players from May to August. That's a few months of, collecting data and just hearing different opinions and coming up with my own opinions. So today we're going to look at 4 players who have risen in my rankings from early May into early August. So the first guy I want to talk about is Anthony Richardson, and back in May, he was my QB 15, and now he's my QB 11. Now, 4 draft spots isn't crazy, but it's pretty significant when it comes to being a mid QB 2 to a late QB 1. Rookie quarterbacks typically are players you avoid for fantasy. They've just never really been good. Honestly, they throw for 22 touchdowns and 10 picks and 15 picks, and you go, I'm good. But Richardson has the cheat code, right? He's Cam Newton. It's just so easy for him to finish at least as a top 10 quarterback. He could be the worst passer in the league. Last year, Daniel Jones was the QB 9 with the stat line of 3,200 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. But he had 120 carries for 700 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. The guy threw for 15 touchdowns last year and was the QB 9 in fantasy football. Even back in 2020, worst case scenario, Cam Newton finished as the QB 16. He only played 15 games. 4 games, he didn't even play 100% of the snaps. This is when he was with the Patriots. He threw for 2,600 yards, 8 touchdowns, 10 picks, but had 600 yards on the ground, scored 12 touchdowns, which is a lot to ask for a quarterback. But in a season where he threw 8 touchdowns and ran for only 600 yards, had 12 touchdowns, and only played 15 games, he was the QB 16. So I think just any way you put it with Anthony Richardson, I don't care how bad he is, if he is active on the ground and he comes out of the gates running, I think he is easily a lock to be a top 10 quarterback. I'm just going to take the risk with Anthony Richardson. Hopefully he throws for 20 touchdowns and can run for 700, 800 plus yards and maybe 5 to 10 touchdowns in that range. If he can hit that, then I've just made my money in fantasy football. Next on the list is someone that's pretty obvious who I think is a riser on everybody's list, but it's Alexander Madison. And back in May, I had him at running back 36, and now I have him as RB 17. And this one was like I said, it was obvious. They cut Dalvin Cook from the Minnesota Vikings, so he's gone. So now it's Alexander Madison's show. It's his show. I think he's a solid player. I don't think he's as special as Dalvin Cook, but that's 300 touches that are just gone. And did Minnesota really bring in anyone super significant to take any carries away? I don't think so. And all the beat reports I see are Alexander Madison's ready for a 3-down role. He's our guy. We want him to be the guy. And I don't think that Minnesota would have just cut Dalvin Cook, who wasn't really out of his prime. I mean, sure, maybe he could have maybe declined a little bit. The stats weren't quite there last year where they used to be, but I don't think they would have just straight up cut Dalvin Cook if they weren't sure Alexander Madison would be good. The Vikings are a playoff team, especially in an NFC North division that sucks now with, Jordan Love for the Packers, no Rodgers. That division is wide open. So I think, Alexander Madison stepping up into that role as the starting running back is really a big vote of confidence from his coaching staff. So like I said, there's 300 touches available. Will he get all 300? Probably not. But if he can finish with 250 to 300, somewhere in that range, he's easily going to smash being a top 14, 15, 16 RB this year easily. And that's why I have him higher in my rankings. Next on the list, I think is the craziest decision I made, the craziest guy. I can't believe I'm doing it. But I looked at the rankings last night, and I'm going Calvin Ridley. He was my wide receiver 22, but now I'm going for the upside of wide receiver 14. I think that's ballsy. If you want a league winner, this is the guy. It's Calvin Ridley. Here's your pick. Big risk, big reward. But I don't think the downside is as low as you think it is. I just saw Christian Kirk and Zay Jones both finish with over 80 receptions. Christian Kirk had 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, and Jones had 825, 5 touchdowns. I think Ridley's better than all these guys, right? I think he's probably the only guy who's actually a number one receiver, where Christian Kirk is kind of, but I think you're a better team if Christian Kirk's maybe your complementary receiver, your wide receiver 2, your field stretcher, where Ridley to me is the guy that can just work any place of the field, any level. He could run short, medium, deep. He's a really good route runner. The problem is, can he stay healthy? Ridley has battled some injuries. He's had mental health issues. He's had a lot of issues that have kept him off the field and kept him from being truly elite. Even his last year with Atlanta, he wasn't that awesome. That could be a Matt Ryan problem, and I think it was, as we saw with his last year with the Colts. But, Calvin Ridley in, this offense with Doug Peterson, with Trevor Lawrence, who really broke out last year. What if Lawrence takes another step? What if Lawrence just takes another leap to where he jumps into kind of like the Justin Herbert field, where he goes for 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns? We could be looking at a huge season for Calvin Ridley. And looking at my rankings again, I'm willing to take him over T. Higgins, who I've seen put up 1,000 yards and 5-6 touchdowns and 70 catches 3 years in a row. I'm done with that. I'm done with maybe the Keenan Allen where is he old now? But he doesn't really have the upside. DK Metcalf, they just drafted Jackson Smith Njigba, and they have Tyler Lockett. I'm good. I'm going to take the risk with Calvin Ridley because at the worst, I think he's a 1,000-yard receiver, 5 touchdowns, 80 to 90 catches, which is a solid receiver. Maybe a little too high for wide receiver 14, but for the upside that I think he could really provide for a team, wide receiver 14 seems pretty good price for me. Next on the list for me is Deontay Johnson, was my wide receiver 45, and now he's my wide receiver 24. Now, you might say, oh my God, that's insane. Why would you even put this guy on your list? He was a complete bust last year, and agreed. But since the year 2013, there have only been 3 players who have gotten 100 targets or more who have finished with 0 touchdowns. And it was Laviska Shenault in last year, or 2021 rather, with 100 targets flat, 0 touchdowns. In 2013, Hakeem Nicks with 101 targets, 0 touchdowns. Deontay Johnson had 147 targets last year and with 0 touchdowns. That's just like impossible. It cannot happen, right? He was 8th in the NFL in targets, 11th in receptions with 86. I like Deontay Johnson. I think he's a very talented receiver, and I'm just willing to bet at wide receiver 24. I don't care about situations anymore. I don't care if Kenny Pickett's good or not. If this guy's going to get targeted 150 times and he's going to finish the season with 86 catches, which could truthfully go up if he just, if Kenny Pickett gets a little bit better. So if a guy who's going to finish with maybe 90 catches, I just think I'm in. What if he goes back to his normal of catching, 6 or 7 touchdowns? Last year didn't look so bad then, right? It looked like he had a decent year. So a guy who I think is going to get targeted 150 times could go for 80 to 90 catches, 1,000 yards, and 5 to 6 touchdowns, which I think would be a big bounce back for him at wide receiver 24. It's not huge upside, but I think he's just a very safe player that I'm willing to take again this year for fantasy football. And to round out my list, I'm going to go with Devonta Smith, wide receiver 15, now going as the wide receiver 11. Now, I had this whole thing baked in early in the season where I went, Devonta Smith it's fluky because Dallas Goedert got hurt and they have an alpha receiver and AJ Brown in front of him, which is true, but I just think Devonta Smith's really good. Once again, I just think he's a great player. Is he going to have his really good weeks and bad weeks? Of course he is. He's going as a wide receiver too. And I think that's the one thing as fantasy owners we need to really understand. We need to be realistic with what a wide receiver 2 is in fantasy football. They're not consistent every week. If they were consistent week in and week out, they would be AJ Brown, who's going as the wide receiver 7 or 8. They would be wide receiver 1s. But Devonta Smith's not. He's going as a wide receiver 2. Granted, a high-end wide receiver 2, but there's going to be inconsistent weeks. But his upside is pretty historic. I mean, we saw it last year. A guy who was almost a 0, caught 0 passes in the first game of the season, went out and had 1,200 yards and had really, a pretty decent touchdown number, caught a lot of passes and led them to a Super Bowl appearance. I'm not worried about the guys around him. I think if Jalen Hurts even takes another step at quarterback, even if he stays the same, I think Devonta Smith could be in for a pretty good season and just return draft capital. I'm not worried about the other guys around him. And all right, those are 5 players who are rising on my current draft board. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you're just getting back into the swing of things, stick around, leave a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'll leave the playlist down below so you guys can check out, the 20 plus fantasy videos I have over the off season. Like I said, if you like the video, leave a like down below, subscribe for more, and stick around. There's more content coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.